Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michelle Sullivan. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm the Associate Dean of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Boston University's College of Communication. I'm also a professor of the practice in advertising and a first-generation college student and proud graduate of the College of Communication. I'd like to welcome everyone to this afternoon's event, Shifting from Hustle to a Self-Care Mindset, Strategies for Media Professionals, which is part of our Com Talk series. I'm grateful for everyone who worked on putting on today's event together with us here at Com, and I'd especially like to thank our Melande Jean Simone, Com's marketing and event specialist, for her work towards making today's program happen. Before I introduce our topic for today and our moderator and turn the program over to her, I wanted to let you know that today's event is being recorded. The recording will be available on the COM website and also on our YouTube channel. For any of our audience members who are joining us live, we welcome your questions. Please type them into the Q&A box instead of the chat box at the bottom anytime. It's located at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and our panel will get to all of those questions a bit later in the program. So let me introduce today's discussion topic. How many of us have heard the phrase hustle hard? Society tells us that hustling makes people more successful and allows them to get ahead, yet studies have shown that hustle culture takes a toll on people's emotional, mental, and physical health. For people in marginalized communities, the damage to their overall health is worse. During the pandemic and racial reckoning, various campaigns filled our social media feeds with resources to address mental health and wellness. Self-care became socially acceptable, even popular. As communication professionals promoting these campaigns, what are we doing and what can we do to change our mindset and practice self-care and wellness in our own lives? And how can organizations implement best practices to ensure their employees and other stakeholders can achieve work-life balance and keep our overall health in check? It's going to be a great discussion. Thank you all again for being here. And now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator and turn the virtual microphone over to her. Please join me in welcoming Ivelisse Morales, also a graduate of the College of Communication and the founder of Bombilla. Ivelisse, over to you.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you everyone for investing some of your own self-care time and joining us today. I'm really honored to share the virtual stage with E-Schwan, Alice, and Dr. Charmaine. As Michelle mentioned, my name is Ivelisse. I go by Evie for short. I'm a proud College of Communication alum, class of 2012. I majored in public relations. And 4 years ago, I decided to leave the corporate agency world to start my own and reimagine the creative agency model while serving mission-driven clients. And my pronouns are she, hers, typically based in Oakland, California, but today I'm joining you all from Mexico City because I'm about to go on a CEO self-care vacation of my own. And I'm really looking forward to learning from everyone because I know I definitely suffer from hustling too hard and burning myself out with my own ambitions. And yeah, so to kick things off, let's get to know the amazing folks on this call today. So to start, I'll kick it over to Dr. Charmaine.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm so excited to be part of this panel. I am Dr. Charmaine Jackman. I am the founder and CEO of InnoPsych Inc., which is an organization on a mission to disrupt racial inequities in mental health. And we do that through two ways. We have a National Therapist of Color Directory that, again, really provides access to a range of mental health services. And it's chock filled with information, blogs, and resources that can help you along that emotional well-being journey. We also work with organizations to really focus on employee of color well-being. So if you'd like to have me come to your organization, we can definitely share information about that later on.
Thank you, Dr. Charmaine. How about you, Alice?
Hi, everyone. My name is Alice. I'm a career intuitive and mindset coach. I had a bit of a life crisis in my late 20s that really made me dive into mindfulness, yoga, astrology, and all of those things, and has allowed me to really pursue a job, a profession that really lights me up, and I help others do so as well. I am also a proud COM alum, and I'm really excited to talk more about self-care and what it really means today, because it really starts with the individual. And it's not just buying a massage, it's not buying a crystal, it's really so much more than that. So welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you, Alice. Over to you, E-Schwan.
Hi, everyone. I'm E-Schwan Godfrey. I am a mother to 2 young children, a daughter to elderly parents. I am also a friend, a confidant, a spouse. And those are all the roles that I play in addition to being a caregiver for myself that we often forget. I am a COM and CAS dual degree alum from Boston University, and also co-founder and CEO of Apiari. We designed Apiari, and I should add that my co-founder is also a BU law school alum. And we founded Apiari because we really believe that we wanted people to say hell yes to things in life. And oftentimes when we're burdened with caregiving, work, and studying, we often don't get the chance to say yes to things. So by creating a platform that helps people find and book and manage in-home care help, we're hoping that families, particularly working moms, can say yes to things like going out on a date night, going out with girlfriends, even saying yes to those stretch jobs at work, because they don't have to be the only ones giving caregiving duties at home. I'm really excited to be here and looking forward to our discussion today.
Thank you, thank you. And it wouldn't be right to make time for self-care without creating some spaciousness and a moment of pause. So I'll kick it over to Dr. Charmaine, who's going to lead us through a mindfulness exercise.
Thank you, Ivelisse. And I forgot to mention, I did my own CEO vacation in February. So needed. And I love that you're doing something like that as well for yourself. So I love to start every workshop that I do with some opportunity to pause and just take a moment to reflect and to kind of check in with ourselves and to kind of assess, what do I need in this moment? So I'm going to ask you, I'm going to invite you to just focus on your breath. And I'm going to do 3 things. We're going to breathe, notice, adjust, and just check in. This is part of our check-in process. And so there are lots of different breathing techniques. The one that I favor is one called slow breathing. And what you do is you breathe in on a count of 3, and you exhale. I always have my clients imagine that they're breathing out through a straw. So really small controlled breath. And you're going to exhale on a count of 6. So let's just do that together. So breathe in on a count of 3. 1, 2, 3. And exhale on a count of 6. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I invite you to do that a couple more times, and just ignore my count because I might be counting slower or faster than is comfortable for you. And as you're breathing in, I want you to just notice any tension or tightness in your body. To exhale, notice any feelings that are present, any thoughts that are kind of rocking around in your brain. Just kind of notice what's happening for you in terms of your body, your feelings, and your thoughts. And the adjust is, oftentimes when I breathe, I notice that I carry a lot of tightness in my shoulders. So I'm going to make an adjustment to kind of roll my neck, roll my shoulders, just kind of release that tension. I invite you again to release and let go of any distracting thoughts or emotions so that you can be fully present in this moment. And then one question, what do I need in this moment? So asking yourself, what do you need in this moment? And as you continue, take one more last breath. And I invite you to set an intention for this time today. Think about one feeling, or think about the feeling that you'd like to have at the end of this moment. One permission you'd like to give yourself at the end of this talk today. So feel free to post that in the chat so you can share that with us. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Dr. Charmaine. I've been personally learning how important breathing is. I recently came across a term called email apnea, where whether we're scrolling on our phones or checking email on the computer, we tend to hold our breath. Like we're like waiting for something. And then if we're not breathing, we're not telling our body to relax. And so it's kind of fascinating how our technology habits are impeding and impacting our ability to relax. And so, as you can all see, we are high energy, high powered, high achievers, highly ambitious. We are leaders, caregivers, employers, visionaries, and creatives. And it's so, so important to nourish ourselves so that we can continue the work. And I wanted to start off quoting one of my favorite Black feminist activists and poets, Audre Lorde, who said that caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. So in Audre's words, this is how she would define taking care of herself. So I present to you all, E-Schwan, Dr. Charmaine, and Alice, how do you define self-care and what's your philosophy around it?
I can go.
Okay.
So self-care is so much more. And I talk about this a lot because the media and society paints it to be something that is purchasable. Like if you go do something, you buy something, you're just going to feel better. But actually self-care is something you do every single day and every single moment. It's so much more. There's intention, awareness around it. And so for me, it's looking at everything. It's looking at your fears or anxieties, the things you want to ignore, but also really realizing and surrendering to the dreams and the vision you have and the vision you hold for yourself and for others. It's so powerful to think of self-care in that way, because it allows you to understand what you need on an emotional, mental, spiritual level. And not only does it allow you to understand what challenges that you are facing or you don't even know about, but also what you really want to create in this life. So self-care is really coming home to yourself and getting to know yourself.
Thank you, Alice. How about you, Sean?
I have to, echo what Alice has shared. For me, I think it's often very much to Kayla's point, feeling present and really feeling connected to yourself. So I always imagine that there is, for everyone, our best selves, right? We have a vision of who we want to be at our best selves. When I am the best mom, when I am the best daughter, when I'm the best spouse, I look and feel like this. And for me, self-care is about how I get closer to being that person on an everyday level. And it takes a lot of intention. It takes a lot of saying no's, and it takes a lot of pauses for me personally to get to that best self for myself.
Well, there's a reason why we're on this panel together. Let me just say, because everything that you said, I could snap to. So yeah, I think it's self-defined. I really, similar to what both Alice and E-Schwan just said, it's really about taking care of your insight, taking care of I think about it through the lens of your mental well-being. So we do a lot of focus on what I call pampering or commercial self-care, the mani-pedis, getting the hair done, the spa days. I love how you framed it, Alice, in like things that are purchasable. But it's really, and those are really just the external, right? But for me, self-care is like that soul care, like taking care of your inside, taking care of your emotional health and your mental well-being, understanding your patterns and thinking about ways to rectify those. And at the end of the day, it's doing things that bring you joy. And it is a daily practice. It is something that you're doing every day. I think we'll talk about this later, but we often think about self-care in response to feeling stressed out. And it really is about your daily practice of feeling good and doing things that make you feel joyful.
So what I'm hearing is that self-care is a lot of work. So let's talk about rest, because rest is relative. Me personally, I'm a very anxious, high energy person. And so the thought of like taking a nap or just doing nothing is really overwhelming. And I've been exploring that For me, rest might look like reading a book or, taking care of my plants and creating a project out of that, right? So doing work that gives me joy that isn't my job. So I would love to hear from you, like in your life, what does relaxing, restoration, and rejuvenation look like outside of the purchasable self-care tactics?
I can start with this one. During the pandemic, it was been really hard for me to find real rest. Even though we were all stuck at home and many of us were probably working from our beds while we're supposed to be resting, it was not restful at all. In fact, I felt many of us went on to a master to-do list, right? There was so much things that had to be done, from home, from work, that it was just one checklist after the other. And what I found personally was that we started to lose a lot of creativity or a lot of just general, space that we had carved out originally for personal growth, for dreams, for aspirations. And that I feel like all went away. So one of the things I came across during the pandemic was this book called The Artist's Way. And what was really interesting was the fact that she said in one of her weekly exercises, take one day where you do not read. And I thought, that's not hard. I'm not a big reader, right? So I was like, I can do this. And I found myself every time I had a moment of rest, I had an urge to pick something up to read, whether it was a newspaper, whether it was a book, whether it was a magazine article. And I realized that for me, I can't rest. Like I always had to be doing something. And so Ivelisse, when you were telling us about how you rest, I was laughing because that was a lot of doing, and I think I really would like to challenge ourselves, take a day this weekend and do nothing. And it may be that exercise of like challenge yourself not even to read anything. And you get to see how much you're still doing, or maybe it's not going on a screen, and see how often you pick up this habit of doing something. And so I'm learning rest from my son, my 11-year-old, who when I kick off the screen, I often find him lying on the carpet, staring at the ceiling and really doing nothing. But I can see the imagination, the dreaming, the thought, the living in where he wants to be his best self starting to happen. And that is what I'm starting to practice on my own these days.
I think that is so important, Yi-Hsian, because we don't realize that rest is productive, and rest is when creativity, intuition, and honestly, our truth finds us, because we've been conditioned to be in a doing state rather than a being state. And oftentimes when people are complaining like, I'm tired, yes, to a certain extent, you're physically tired, but more so you're energetically tired. And with that tip from The Artist's Way of not like reading anything, that means consuming. That means, like being on TikTok, social media, even just talking to someone. There is a lot of power in cultivating alone time, and thus cultivating your own energy and vibe. If you're feeling energetically drained, if you're feeling like you're pulled in all directions, you are probably looking at your phone when you wake up. You're not spending time each day to set an intention before you start the day, or even just making some time for yourself. And Evie, before you're like, it sounds like a lot of work. However, it's really not, because you have to come from it from a place of enjoyment. You get to do these things. It's not that you have to do these things. And whether you have 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening, or an hour in the morning, an hour in the evening, it really doesn't matter, because it fluctuates. It depends on what you need. And so it's so important to spend time alone, to be in nature, and to not look at your phone all the time, to create space for yourself, because we don't realize when we're reading the news, we're on social media, we're getting programmed subconsciously. Literally, this is how ads work. Hello, we're in the school, we're in cop. This is what we do. We're influencing, and we're also creating the world that we live in. And you have to be very self-aware of what you left into your own world.
Yes, agreed. Again, I think for me, the rest is also hard to come by, and I have to, again, it's about defining it in my own way. And you asked about relaxation and rest and restoration. I would say I am similar to all of you, and I think it's also connects to I'm leading a company, right? That's a startup that's growing. So it can feel really hard to like take time, take some steps away. And I've been practicing that more. My not resting is staying up very late. And so I've been going to bed much earlier. So that's a huge improvement. And I feel the difference in my body. But my mind is always going, right? So yeah, when you talked about not reading it, I'm like, even the cereal box, right? I feel like we're like, I'm just programmed to read all the time. So I think there's a grace that we have to have with ourselves, right? When we're thinking about self-care. You don't have to do it all in one moment, right? Or you don't have to get it right every day. It's really a process. And for me, during COVID, I started walking. Walking was something my mom did and wasn't cool enough for me to do. And I really evolved in my own thinking around it. And I just enjoy it. So sometimes I just get out around the block. And that gives me space to not be in front of the screen. It allows me to think more imaginative and brings in that creativity. So I really have had to adjust, for me, what rest looks like. I have two very active kids who are involved in a lot of things. And so Sundays I get to sleep in. So that's rest for me. Like I mentioned earlier, I took a week off and went to Barbados, which is the country I was born. And so that was a rejuvenation, a restoration for me. And so it's going to look different every day and every week, but what is the commitment? And I talk about radical self-care. What is the commitment that you're making to yourself on this journey? So that's how I would respond to that.
I see that we have some questions related to this, if you don't mind, Evie. You know, during the pandemic, I literally had given people permission to go and binge on Netflix because that's what we needed at times. But I would say that I don't call it rest.
Yeah.
I do use TV as a way to numb my mind, but rest for me isn't numbing my mind. It's really about opening my mind and letting my thoughts really come to me and being able to process what's either bothering me or inspiring me. But I think when you have a TV on, you're not able to do that. And for me, that's not really rest. But I do use TV a lot. Trust me, I have 2 young kids. And sometimes I'm like, bye-bye kids, I gotta go watch a show because I just need to numb my mind. And I think there's a question also, how do you stop yourself? You know, sometimes it depends on how bad you have it. You know, sometimes you try to go cold turkey and it's hard. You know, it's taking that day on Sundays. Like we have a screen-free Sunday where all of us have to kind of pull ourselves away from the screen. And then you start to get a little bit used to it. You know, you start to incorporate a lot of these practices that you can start to, you know, stretch it out throughout the week as well. But, you know, it really depends on how bad you have it and what kind of, you know, remedy and, you know, medicine you need to kind of take for yourself right now to kind of get yourself reset. So those are the things I like to add to some of the comments here.
And I know this is like a really unpopular opinion. And also it's not like I don't watch any TV or movies, but TV is very stimulating, but it's something that we've just been conditioned from a very young age to pay attention to, like, oh, this is what I do to relax. But what we don't realize is like, yeah, we're just kind of zoning out or watching something, but it's so important to realize, like, even when you're not paying attention, it kind of puts you into like a hypnotic state of being influenced. Like I think about a lot how in the 90s when I grew up, pretty much everything I watched, it was just white people falling in love, white people going on vacation, white people getting jobs. And I had the realization maybe a year ago, I don't know when it was, but I realized that in my own business, I was mirroring what I saw as a child. I was being the sidekick. And I started my business purely through events and showcasing other experts within wellness. And then through building my business these last few years, I've realized, no, I have to take center stage. There are things that, you know, I want to share. And so I really stepped into being like the face and the branding and everything for my business. But I realized, I was like, I wonder if that comes from the conditioning of watching all those TV shows and those movies, 100%, you know, of me being the sidekick. So, you know, something to be aware of. Now we have a lot of different things that we're able to watch, but even when I watch something that maybe I don't want reflected in my reality, like scary movies, I'll set that intention. I'm like, this is not real. Let's not get scared. That's something I want people to be aware of. I know it's really hard. TV is so fun. I mean, it's like eating a potato chip. They spend a lot of money making sure these things are addictive. They're addictive.
Thank you, Alice. And we can see it too with how Instagram reels and TikTok videos that are super, super short forms of entertainment and content is really speaking to that speed and rate of consumption, and so important to step away from it. And I appreciate you bringing up the cultural influences. It's a great segue to my next question. You know, everyone here on this panel can uniquely relate to the lived experience of being an immigrant or the child of immigrants or being first generation. How was self-care modeled for you and your family growing up? How does your culture influence your rest? I know for me, I'm first generation. My parents are from Puerto Rico, and you know, my mom always had to have multiple jobs to make ends meet. And so she didn't allow me and my little brother to rest because there was always something to do. So for example, on the weekends, you know, first thing 8 a.m. on Saturday, salsa's blasting, and we all got to work. There's no such thing as being idle. And there's always something to do, right? So, and I can definitely see how I've kept up that hustle, even being self-employed. And it's like, how do I unlearn that? It's really hard. So would love to hear from all of you on how this shows up for you and your life.
I can start us off. So I grew up in Barbados, so I could connect to everything you're saying, Ivelisse. But my mom, she started a business. I was probably maybe around 9 or 10. It was first her side hustle. She literally would sell beauty and home care products out of the back of her car. She would drive around to people's offices at lunchtime, on weekends. She would go out to the rural parts. It was like a mobile 7-Eleven, if you could think about it that way. And so that was her business, right? So she worked a 9 to 5, and she did that on weekends or even when she wasn't working. And she had a mission, right? She had a goal. She wanted to, she had recently divorced from my dad, and she had a vision about, you know, wanting to own her own home and things like that. So I remember at one point she quit her job because she was doing so well. She quit her 9 to 5 and was doing this full time. And people thought she'd lost her mind, right? Who leaves a cushy job, especially in the Caribbean? You don't leave a good paying job to go to this risky self-employment piece. But she was really successful, and she ended up being a serial entrepreneur. She was able to purchase land in this very affluent area, build a house from scratch. And then she opened a hair salon. She went back to school, learned how to be a cosmetologist, and then she was a caterer. So she's moved through different pieces, but throughout all of those, she was grinding hard. I remember going back home at one point when she had her catering business, and she would be up till like 3 o'clock, you know, baking, and then at 5 back up to like get out to people's businesses before breakfast. So I saw a lot of hustle. Not sleeping well, not taking care of our body. And so I definitely incorporated a lot of that. And that's why till today, the sleep thing is like my nemesis. So it's just, but I'm also more mindful and aware. And I have 2 young children who are 9 and 11. So I'm also thinking about the messages that they're seeing, right? Because very early on, I was seeing these messages and it's so encoded. So how am I modeling self-care? How am I modeling good habits, particularly around sleep? And how am I showing up for them? You know, in addition to them seeing me in my business and as a mompreneur, but also how am I also modeling that self-care piece? And it is really tricky. But that's something I'm very aware of.
Yeah, Alice, you and I can probably talk about our culture. There's no such thing as rest. I mean, it has nothing to do with immigrants, I feel like. It's either you are working or you are studying. There's no in between. And then you have to be 100% faithful and respectful for your elders. So whatever your parents need or your aunts and uncles, if there's some kind of family need, you're stepping up to the occasion, and you just give and give and give. And it's never asked if you need anything or if you are needing a break from the stuff. So, I think traditionally it's been really hard for me, and I had to learn this in the last couple of years, to be honest, to start saying no to even my parents, because of that constant asking. And it's not even that they really needed me to do things. I think just culturally, they're just used to asking. even though they can do these things themselves or they have other outlets to do other things, but I think it's just expected from a cultural perspective. So I don't know if it's really a hustle question from the culture, but it's definitely a give, do culture that, at least I grew up in my household. Alice, I don't know if yours is any different.
Yeah, but I also had the opportunity to live in China. So I'm a first generation Chinese American, and I had the opportunity after school to work in Shanghai, where my parents are from, for 5-6 years. And I could see a stark difference between my parents and their siblings who stayed in China. They have a much better handle on self-care. They go on vacations, they've seen the world. Like my parents, they, for better or for worse, and they got to this country, it was just like a grind. They're like, it's very much so like the best way I can describe it is survival and then thriving. They're still in a survival mode, even though they don't need to be anymore. But that's something that they've done over a period of time, and they're just really used to it. And I've really had to decondition myself these last few years, specifically with this business that I have that opportunity to do it for myself and to do it for my clients, and understanding like, how do I want to live life? Like what are the limiting beliefs that I have, what comes from like childhood. And a lot of it's like, my mom always said, like, you have to work really hard. You just have to work really hard. And I always got that feeling that work is supposed to be hard. And there's like a heaviness to it, almost like a forcing that work can't be something joyful, but work can be joyful if that's what you want it to be. It's really up to, the individual. And there's, and just making time for yourself, like, wasn't really like, yes, we did do those things, but it wasn't emphasized in the way that I emphasize now. And I still feel guilty when I rest. And so every time I feel guilty, I kind of sit in the feeling, and then I'm like, you're resting either way, so why don't we feel good about it?
Thank you, Alice. I know one thing that comes to mind is like, at which generation do we choose to rest? And we might be that, right? We have to acknowledge and keep in mind that our parents entered into this country at a different socioeconomic level, have to deal with racial and gender injustices, and surviving, in this capitalist white supremacist system. We have to piece multiple jobs together to make ends meet, and we do have to brunt and deal with a lot in the workplace just to make things work. So with us having, college degrees and the ability to start our own businesses and really change the narrative and design our future, it's pretty empowering and cool. And I'm thinking, like, how do I gift this back to my parents? For Christmas, I treated them to a short trip to a beautiful beach town in Northern California, and it felt so special to me to give them a really, beautiful place to just be. I took care of the logistics and everything, and that felt really good. And I definitely need to take these notes, because this hustle grind has to slow down. And so, the other thing to keep in mind is, like, on top of all the isms that we have to deal with, we have the pandemic, we have a lot of responsibilities weighing on us. We also have a climate crisis and a war. I mean, there's just so much. We know that depression is one of the most common forms of mental illness in the United States. 1 in 5 folks of color are diagnosed with depression, and 1 in 3 entrepreneurs live with depression. So this is pretty serious. And I know in the last few years, mental health has been placed on the map. It's become less taboo. People are more forthright in expressing what they're dealing with, whether it's like acute in the moment or long-term. So Dr. Charmaine, would love to hear, since you're a mental health expert, how do you care for yourself? How do you care for your mental and emotional, physical well-being when we're just dealing with so much high stress coming at us from so many different sides?
Absolutely. And I think it really goes back to, again, not thinking about our self-care only in response to stress. Is what are we doing on a daily basis? What are our daily practices that fosters our optimal well-being, that allows us to let go of things that we don't need to hold on to. So I think it's really that practice. And I do a lot of mindfulness in my own practice and in my work with clients, because I think they are really accessible tools. I really focus on kind of the bite size, like it doesn't have, you get to define it, doesn't have to be an hour of exercise, 5 times a week, right? You really get to define what that looks like for you. And it's really about building those habits that will help you feel good. As I think about mental health and depression in particular, anxiety, I would also add anxiety to that, because we're seeing significant increases in depression and anxiety in response to the pandemic. And I think also when you think about the workplace, data shows that over 60% of employees report experiencing burnout that's work related. So we are in high stress environments. And then you also add the social context, right, to that. So where do we get a break? And it's really about how are you building in those pieces that really allows you to release and let go and to restore. One of the things that I founded InnoPsych in 2019, and we launched our platform in January 2020, just a couple months before COVID. And again, our mission is to destigmatize mental health and to make mental health services more accessible to people of color. So the timing couldn't have been more perfect to have a company that was focused on that. And for people, because what we saw in response to the pandemic is that people of color are more interested and more open to actually seeking therapy services and understanding their mental health and well-being. There's also a social movement, I think, that we see probably in the millennial generation about self-care and emotional well-being. And I think that's the more education that we're seeing around that. We're also seeing more therapists of color step into the space and increase their own visibility and being leaders and being influencers around mental health and wellness. So I think all of those coming together have been really wonderful and beautiful. But I also want to just note that there are also people walking around with depression and anxiety and don't even know it. Sometimes they know it, but don't want to address it or don't know where to start. So I think, the work that I'm doing is really about how we're breaking the silence about mental health, how we're reducing the stigma, because the more that we can be educated, the more knowledge we have, and the more open we are to asking for help and really tapping back into what do we need and asking for those, I think we can really be in a better place. I just take examples from, there have been a couple of recent suicides, deaths by suicides, some people in kind of the media, there was a mayor. So we're seeing increases in suicide rates for young people, children of color. Actually, Black children have twice as high suicides as white children. And we're seeing higher rates in Black men and Black women. And so if we're not talking about this is a consequence for our communities. If we don't talk about mental health, if we don't make these conversations part of our daily conversations, normalizing those conversations, letting people know what you're feeling is legit, express those feelings, don't hold them in. So I think that the more that we can do more education, I'm really urging therapists to get out of their offices and be a little bit more creative in how they also communicate their resources to people, because I think that makes it more accessible for everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Charmaine. I agree, it's super, super important to invest in these conversations and dialogue and in seeking support. There are many resources out there that we can link you to. There's hotlines that you can text and call. There are more affordable therapist resources now. And InnoPsych has a directory that you can tap into, because I know it's super hard working through our insurances to find therapists who look like us and reflect where we come from and who can understand where we come from. It's so, so important. And I know personally for me, I combo my mental emotional well-being with weekly therapy and bi-weekly coaching, because the coaching helps me with how I show up as a leader, and then the therapy helps me with things that I'm still working on in my past and how to practice self-care in the present. And I know, you know, taking
Can I just say, I just love
for it.
that you just shared that, Ivelisse. I think that's really important. And the more that we can talk about going to see a therapist, like, again,
Yes.
that's making it normal. It's making it part of, like, no one has shame about going to see their doctor every year, right? So let's think about therapy and mental health in that same lens.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Charmaine. And so, you know, I know that the conversation as CEOs has been focused on being self-employed. There's also, you know, in terms of all these self-care practices and the need to invest in your mental and emotional well-being applies to everyone, especially media professionals, because we're in an industry that is nonstop. We got the 24-hour news cycle, you know, 30-second TikToks. And when I think about roles, you know, caregiving is a huge responsibility in of itself. It's unpaid. It's disproportionately on the shoulders of women. So E-Schwan, you know, as someone who is advocating for caregivers to reclaim their time and make space for themselves, would love to hear from you on you know, how companies and schools can factor like well-being policies so that we can take time off from work and not have that guilt or negative stigma when we need to take time off.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this also will speak to Drat's question about if hustling and relaxation is mutually exclusive. So, you know, putting on my caregiving and my leadership hat, I really believe that it all comes from modeling. You know, so as a CEO and as a parent, I try to model what type of behaviors and practices that happens both at home and at work. And I think that's what leaders at companies and at schools should also be thinking about. You know, understanding that there is so much stress beyond the task at hand, which may be work. Understanding that your employees may have caregiving responsibilities, may have a sick parent, may have a sick pet, right? Understanding their whole self, you know, their bigger life than what's in front of you at work or at school will really give you that empathy to think about how to provide an environment of care that is needed for them. So a couple of things that, you know, companies and schools can do, for one, is think about time off policies. You know, I remember when I started right after graduating from BU in public relations, I had 3 days of vacation days and I was not allowed to take them consecutively, right? And it was really interesting about the environment that I worked in. But my leader will often say, you know, take time off. Like, we just came off of a big project. I don't need a corporate policy to come in place to give me more time. You as a people leader should look at your employees and realize they have overworked, they were working on a big project. Give them a mental health day. Just say, hey, it's on me. Just don't even dock it onto the system. Go take the next week off, or whenever you need it, just take that day. They'll really appreciate it, and it gives them that space and time to come back, you know, into the job whenever they need it. From a school perspective, I remember, you know, even my kids are now in schooling, where the test schedule, it was just obscene. Like, some days you had 3 tests back to back, and then you had no tests for another 3 days, and then 5 tests all on one day. You know, is there space for the school administration to come together and just really think about school scheduling exams or papers, just again, to give that space for students to be able to handle that workload that's so intensive. And I also want to just remind people that we're not talking about work-life balance. There's just no such thing as work-life balance, right? I think it's about work-life integration. So it's coming to terms that when we hustle, and I hustle all the time as a CEO, I am on for 3 days. That is all I can handle. And I will have to be mindful that, you know, I'm going to get some balance over those. So I look at a week view in my life. I say, this week, it was a really tough 3 early days. I'm going to take 2 days in between to kind of just wind down, do like paperwork stuff, do some stuff that's not really too high intensive or draining, and then I ramp up. So it is a little bit of, you know, trying to strike that balance over a longer view time, rather than trying to hit it every single day, because there's no way that you're going to hit it on a daily basis. So again, you know, it really comes down to the modeling, you know, and I tell my kids this at home too. They see me. Some days are just work, work, work. And then some days are just play, 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 you know, but the long stretch, I feel like I am much more balanced. And how I know that I'm not burnt out is that when I have those play, play, play days, it refuels me, it re-energizes me. And that's when I know that I am in good self-care mode and I haven't reached burnout.
Yeah, and I also wanted to touch upon for those in the audience who, are just starting off in their career and they may not feel like they have a voice. I do remember when I was younger, also just when I mentor people who have just graduated, there is that sense of like, well, everyone else is doing it. What can I say? Like, can I say something? But something that I think about, like when I reflect on like my early 20s, is the lack of boundaries I had, and the confusion of my value system versus collective value systems. And the only advice I could give myself at that age, and even though I had to really experience that to really know what that meant, is just to be brave and to say, I'm really burnt out. I can't take calls in the morning and at night, like literally like 8 a.m, 11 o'clock at night, like, because I was working internationally. And so I was speaking across like all time zones of the world. And I was like, this is what we do. This is what everyone else does. And then after a while, I was like, I don't know if I want to live live and work in this way. I don't know if this job is right for me. And that's a scary thing to realize, especially if you're like a woman of color, like first gen, for you to be like, I don't want this. This is not the life that I want for myself. And when it was something that was your entire reality, and you're like, this is what I've always wanted. This is like my dream. This is my dream job. And why does it not work? And so it's really reflecting and asking ourselves those tough questions of like, it's some places it's worse than others. It's slowly killing you. And is that worth it in the long term, in the short term of your health? And I would say it is not. But in that moment, you could be afraid of like job security, like what will your friends say, what will like your parents say, but at the end of the day, like you have to put your health first, and you have to set the intention that you are able to, and you will find a job and a supervisor and a team that isn't toxic. I don't like how it's normal for us to hate our jobs. Whether you're self-employed, whether you work for someone else, it's not normal. And let's not make it normal.
And I also have to say, as people leaders, sometimes we have to over communicate to our employees on our own behavior. So a good example is I will send out emails at 11 p.m. at night. And I would tell my team, this is the only time today I am able to respond, but please do not respond back to me at 11:30 at night. So those, by setting this expectation, by understanding why I'm sending out emails at a certain time, and also letting them know this is not expected of them, is how we sort of break that cycle where people feel like, oh, because my boss is working now, I have to be on at the same time. It's like, no. It's just that when I'm getting, this is my self-care, and it's how I'm getting to do my stuff. How you do your stuff, that is totally fine, is not expected of you. So I think, again, just really more communications with our employees. Dr. Charmaine, you also talked about communication in general, and I see a question from Vicky Lee about communicating even with our parents, to be like, I know there's certain expectations of me, of what it needs to feel like. I'm making it up to you, but it's not working for me. All right. And here are the stresses that I'm dealing with, and I hope you can understand. So I think the more dialogue we have with our respective, groups of people that we are working with, is how we sort of break this vicious cycle of needing to be on, needing to feel like we're hustling all the time, we're needing to be, faithful and respectful for our parents as well.
Yeah, so many great points that you both shared, and just wanted to echo those around the boundaries. And I think, again, as sometimes as immigrants, as people of color, we haven't had boundaries modeled for us in our homes. So it's really hard to then understand what is it that I need, what my boundaries are in the workplace. So really, really thinking about that. I think for me, as what helped me to shift from being in workplaces that weren't right for me was having coaching. And it's something I got later on in life, and it helped me to really think about my career, what I want. So it gave me that opportunity to reflect on what was working for me and what was not. So I definitely encourage people to, no matter what stage you are, even if you're starting out, to get coaching, because I think it really helps you to really think about your career, your longevity of your career as well. The other thing I wanted to add on to what Yi-Hsian said was around the play, and I definitely connect with the work and the play. And I knew there were times where I was playing with my kids physically, but my mind was elsewhere, right? So I was thinking about all the things like, okay, when is this thing gonna be over so I can go finish up this email or whatever, right? So I think for me, I've even redefined is that plane is where I'm present and really just focus on them. And I think, again, it's evolving as we go through this process. One of the things that I want to also add into the company culture is the recognition of racial stress, and that there are work environments that are toxic to us as people. We show up, right? And so being able to understand how to navigate those, or when to exit those environments which are not serving you, whether it's the career, the field, or is it just the organization. And again, part of it is being able to understand kind of what's good for you. And there is a lot more research coming out around racial stress and racial trauma. And that's some of the work that we're doing at InnoPsych, is really elevating that information so people understand what it looks like, right? Is it burnout, or you're just stressed because of a toxic managerial style? So I think those are also other things I want to bring into that conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Charmaine. That volatile combination, I would say, is what definitely triggered me to start my own company. And in the spirit of hard work and hustle and wanting to get ahead, right? At my last corporate job, I basically ignored all of those telltale signs of burnout and ended up in a situation where I actually had to take time off from work to heal, because my doctor said, you can't keep going back into the workplace that's creating your insomnia, your teeth grinding, and all these other like physical symptoms. Like when it shows up physically, I've been told it's too late, or not too late, you can heal, but you're kind of already on E. And so balance is so important. And I really appreciate, Alice, you empowering young folks to set those boundaries. What's interesting is that my big burnout, as I call it, was around age 28, which I'm aware is the age of the Saturn return. So I'd love to
yes, it is.
Get woo-woo with you as a CEO of the woo-woo company, and learn on the role astrology plays and how we operate.
Oh my God, my fave. Okay, guys, are you ready? All the Gen Zs, are they ready? So astrology, I really like to view all these. I know some people, it's like really divided. Some people are like, I love it. Other people are like, I hate it. Why do people love it so much? But I used to not be a believer in all of these things. And look, here I am now. And I found it to be a really powerful like tool for introspection. And when I look at my birth chart, and really dive into it, like this was a few years ago, I began to just be like, this is just me. I saw it in front of me, like on the computer, and I was just like, this is just who I am, and that's okay. And it was really helpful for self-acceptance, empowerment. And then I also look at the chart to see, what I'm meant to be doing in this lifetime. What are some of those challenges that I have? And specifically for our conversation today about self-care, you look at your moon sign. So normally horoscopes are based on the sun sign, but the first things you should actually look like your sun, moon, and rising. And I'll just talk about the moon for our conversation. The moon sign really helps you with self-care. So when you look at your moon sign, it's how you feel safe. It's how you process emotions. Mine is in an earth sign, Capricorn. If anyone else shares that sign, it's like, we don't have emotions. We explain them away. But honestly, for me to feel like comforted, for me to like practice self-care, it means spending time outside, being very grounded, connecting to the earth, doing practical things like making lists so I feel organized. So those are things that are very helpful for me. So if anybody actually knows their moon sign and wants to know like specifically like what is helpful, you can put it into the chat and I'll answer. But when you look at your moon sign, it gives you an idea of like, what are the best ways to take care of yourself? If you're like, I don't know how to make a self-care routine. Like, what does that mean? All I know is what people have told me: read a book, watch TV, go out with my girlfriends. But it's so much more. And it's really just getting to know yourself.
Thank you, Alice.
I want to know my moon sign now. How do I find it out?
I'll take you up on the topic.
My daughter is doing a moon journal. She's doing a whole project. So they're looking at all the phases of the moon. So I'm like, I'm very curious.
So also, everyone feel free to DM me on Instagram about it, especially the panelists. So also, The moon sign is how you're parented. So mine was like really no nonsense, very direct, straightforward, very practical, career oriented, because Capricorn is the career sign.
And how does that tie into like feminine energy? Because I know the moon also represents that too.
Yeah, so in this instance, it really talks more about like self-care, but also like where you need to like soften as well. Like feeling a bit more kindness to yourself, of like smoothing out the edges for myself, like Capricorn, like you don't always need to have things be black and white. You don't always have to have things so straightforward, and really just leaning in to understand like what do you need to feel good, but also understanding the fact that, you know, if your sign is like, you know, very like if it's a fire sign and it allows you to understand like, okay, I am a bit volatile. So yes, this is something that helps me feel good in terms of if you're a fire sign, like exercise, like HIIT exercises are really great, something that sparks your creativity. But also when you feel like that there's too much of that energy, you're like, okay, I need to do some like grounding. I need to take a walk. Or just need to like do a meditation to just really tone it down.
Alice, thanks for putting some words in context for me, because what I've noticed in the past year and what I've been really doing fairly well is I think when you take good self-care of yourself, you're very in tune to where you are. So there are days when I have this hyper energy and I am hustling hard on those days because I know I'm tapping into that energy. And then on some days when I'm a little lull, I have to figure out what are the counterbalances activity that I do to balance that out. But I think, again, when you're in a really good self-care zone, you're much more noticeable about where your ebbs and flows are, that you can start, you know, playing with it. So if I feel like my energy is really low, I do some really high energy stuff. I also know when I'm on spreadsheets, I'm going to need, you know, a lot of like HIIT exercises afterwards. I am not a spreadsheet person. It does not give me joy. But again, it's like you start to notice these things about yourself that I think if you didn't have good self-care, it just becomes a task.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's just an energy drain, right?
You're on autopilot. So I like to say that the more time you invest, the more deposits you put into your self-care account, the more you'll be able to tap into your intuition. Now, intuition, everybody has, it's really our superpower. And when you develop your intuition enough, it becomes a psychic ability. So we all have intuition. That means we're also all psychic. And that's when you have that, you know, that deep knowing of like, this is the right job for me. This is someone I'm going to get along with. This is a project I'm really excited about. And I know for myself, like I was never taught to really embrace my emotions. And as women, society kind of makes fun of us like, oh, you're so emotional, or you're on your period, like all those things. But what we don't realize, and what I've been studying these last few years and I share with my clients, is the power of your own energy, and how like that in fact is emotion and feeling. That's your frequency. You're always sharing a vibe. You're always sharing, you know, like just how you're feeling. Like if you're feeling drained, you're gonna show up in that way. And also that's like your thoughts, your actions. And so it's so important to be in tune with how you feel. And the feeling behind something is so powerful. And in terms of like, when we talk about manifestation, if you don't know what you want to create, like you can, it's like a be careful what you wish for. Sometimes people have a list of like, this is my dream job, this is my dream person, but it doesn't feel right. I really encourage everyone to really tap into what feels right, because that's also your intuition. Your intuition really communicates to your body. So if your body's breaking down, your intuition's like, this is a last resort because you're not listening. So let's like break your body down, and then you're going to be forced to listen. That's why people make such big life decisions after, whether, you know, a car accident, a big illness or something, because your body is like, I've been trying to tell you, but you're not listening.
One of the other things that I have really I wanted to share with the panel here is also with the audience here is the fact, one of my meditation practice that I loved is the fact of letting thoughts come in and letting them go out. And I think as women, especially people of color, we feel like we need to action on everything that comes in, right? Like have a reaction or do something with something that we're thinking about. And, you know, the practice, if anybody wants to try it, is as you're meditating, if thoughts come in, just pretend you're at a cafe, watching that person walk by and walk right out. You know, and I think that has really allowed me to let things go and not feel like I have to do everything or fix everything or tackle something, but it's like just a thought that came in. I'm happy to let it go. And that has really kind of helped preserve some of my own sanity, especially during this COVID period.
Thank you, Schwan. Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Dr. Charmaine. This was such an amazing conversation. I certainly walked away with new practices to try and mindset shifts to make. And I'm really grateful for COM for hosting this conversation, and Melande for bringing us all together, as well as Michelle. Make sure to get the links from the chat, follow us on social media, and hope you take care of yourself today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Was it
you.
wonderful? Time went way too fast.
I know, we need a part 2.